The Middle East is always quiet for a few days before there is a big commotion again. This time, on July 16th, 2025, Israel directly attacked the Syrian capital Damascus and bombed the Ministry of Defense building and the General Staff headquarters. This was not a small fight. The attack caused at least 1 death and 18 injuries. The scene was a mess and part of the building collapsed. Syrian media reported that Israeli fighter jets flew over from the Golan Heights and dropped missiles directly to these military targets. The reason given by the Israeli military was very simple, saying that the Syrian government forces threatened the safety of local Druze people in Suwaida province, and they had to protect those people. The fighting in Suwaida province began on July 13th. The Druze militia and Bedouin tribes had constant armed conflicts. The Syrian interim government sent troops to intervene. As a result, Israel felt that this was challenging their bottom line and took action directly. Israel did not declare war in advance for this action. It was such a sudden attack, a typical style of beheading first and reporting later. They began airstrikes on Syrian security forces and vehicles in Suwaida province on July 15th and expanded the range on the 16th to hit the heart of Damascus. The military stated that these targets were used by Syria to command troops to Suwaida, and they must be destroyed to prevent further threats. The Druze are a minority in the Middle East, and there are quite a few of them in Israel. Israel has always protected them as its own people. The conflict was caused by the Druze militia and the Bedouin armed forces fighting for territory. The Bedouin side has the support of the Syrian interim government, and even the shadow of Turkey can be seen in their equipment, such as buses and heavy weapons. As a member of NATO, Turkey has its own sphere of influence in northern Syria. This time, Israel's move is equivalent to an indirect challenge to Turkey, and Turkey reacted most strongly. President Erdogan called the Syrian leader directly to condemn the Israeli attack, saying that it was unacceptable and would make the region more chaotic. He reiterated that Turkey would continue to support the Syrian people, especially in the conflict between the Druze and Bedouin. Turkey wants to expand its influence by supporting the interim government. The Turkish parliament also passed a resolution opposing Israel's interference in sending troops to support the northern base. Erdogan's ambition is not small. He wants to pull Syria into his sphere of influence to balance NATO's identity and the Middle East layout, but Israel does not buy it. Their strategy is to weaken Syria's overall strength, prevent the rise of internal extremist forces, and disintegrate the remnants of the Shiite alliance. The decisions of Turkey and Israel directly collide with Israel's core interests, and the room for compromise is pitifully small. U.S. Secretary of State Rubio said at a press conference that Washington is very worried about the ethnic conflict in Syria and the Israeli attack. They have been in contact with all parties to try to stop the fire as soon as possible. He said that all parties have agreed on specific steps to end the conflict, but Israel's actions have embarrassed the Trump administration. After Trump came to power, he adjusted his policy towards Syria. Previously, he offered a reward of $10 million to capture interim President Shara. Now, in Syria's policy, Saudi Arabia shook hands with him and lifted sanctions on Syria. Shara is the former leader of the Nusra Front. He led the Syrian opposition to overthrow Assad and came to power. The United States thinks he can be a new ally to fight against the residual influence of Iran and Russia, but Israel is unhappy. They think Shara's government is not completely obedient, especially on the issue of ethnic groups in the south. Senior U.S. officials told the media that they asked Israel to stop twice and communicated with the Israeli Minister of Strategic Affairs through special envoys, but Israel ignored it. This exposed the cracks in the U.S.-Israel alliance. Israel is the strongest in the Middle East, but it often goes its own way, even if the United States puts pressure on it. Iran is not idle either. The spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs directly issued a statement condemning Israel's violation of Syria's sovereignty, saying that this is a typical act of aggression and calling on the international community to intervene. Iran's Supreme Leader Khamenei has always been anti-Israel. This attack made them more vigilant because Syria was once Iran's ally. Now, the new government is pro-US and Iran's influence has been greatly reduced. But Iran just experienced an Israeli attack in June, where its nuclear facilities were bombed and the country is still in chaos and cannot start a big war. They promoted a joint statement by Middle Eastern countries to oppose foreign intervention and secretly support regional industrial forces. But the reality is that Iran is now unable to take care of itself, and its missile and drone stocks have been seriously depleted, which has weakened its threat to Israel. Of course, the Syrian Ministry of Foreign Affairs also jumped out to accuse Israel of trampling on sovereignty and being an example of continued aggression. They said the attack was a blatant interference in internal affairs and was unacceptable. The Syrian interim government, led by Shura, has been promoting reconstruction and seeking international recognition since it conquered Damascus at the end of 2024, but the internal factions are complicated and the pseudo-Arabian Kurds and Sunnis are constantly pulling each other. The Suwaida conflict is an example. The ammunition of the Druze armed forces comes from Israel. The Bedouin militia has traces of Turkey. This fight is actually a proxy contest between Israel and Turkey. Syria couldn't beat Israel before, and it is even worse now. The country is weak and the army is being reorganized. From diplomatic protests, the root of this conflict lies in the full vacuum in the Middle East. After the fall of Assad, Syria has become a place for wrestling among various parties. Israel wants to expand the buffer zone to protect border minorities. Turkey wants to dominate the north to prevent Kurdish expansion. The United States wants to attract new allies to contain Iran, and Iran wants to maintain its residual influence. The Druze are the key. They live in the Middle East and have unique beliefs. They are not involved in the mainstream sectarian struggles, but Israel uses them as leverage. The Bedouin tribes have strong nomadic habits and low loyalty, and are easily wooed by external forces. Israel's actions expose their strategic intentions. They do not allow any neighboring country to become strong enough to threaten themselves. The Netanyahu government emphasizes security first and promotes strikes against Iran and Syria. He's been in office for a long time and has experienced many wars, but domestic judicial reforms are controversial and there are many health problems. Turkey's Erdogan promotes economic reforms to enhance regional influence, but authoritarianism is only enough. Trump promotes America first to promote the Abraham Accords, but Middle East policy transactions are easy to change. Rubio's British faction opposes Iran's expansion. Khamenei leads Iran's decision-making and supports the resistance axis, but the domestic economic pressure is great. The situation in the Middle East is uncertain and the risk of power games is high. Who knows what will explode next time? Israel's actions are equivalent to telling everyone that only a strong fist counts, but in the long run, if the Palestinian-Israeli issue is not resolved, any situation will change and any country may become a threat to Israel. Turkey and Iran will not give up. The United States is caught in the middle, and it is difficult to be a human being. The Syrian people are the worst. The war continues and reconstruction is far away. This proxy war is an ethnic conflict on the surface, but behind it are calculations by the great powers. Who wins and who loses depends on who blinks first. The current situation in the Middle East is very uncertain, and the game between the great powers is extremely risky. Israel's action this time seems to tell everyone that whoever has a stronger fist has the final say in the Middle East. But in the long run, if the Palestinian-Israeli issue is not resolved, any country in the Middle East that is determined may become a threat to Israel. Turkey and Iran will definitely not give up. The United States is caught in the middle, and it is not easy to be a human being. The most pitiful are the Syrian people. The war has been going on and reconstruction is even more far away. This proxy war is an ethnic conflict on the surface, but behind it are calculations between the great powers. It is really hard to say who will have the last laugh.